Are you ready for this thing?
Yes.
Hey, welcome to the Ministry Mix podcast, where we're bringing you real conversations for the souls and strategies of ministry leaders. I'm Phil Gifford, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Richard Pope.
Hello.
Whether you're
Nothing funny today.
You're not in a funny mood?
No, I'm in a serious mood.
Well, we are here to bring you real conversations that help you grow as a leader. We'll share stories, insights, practical tips, and help you lead strategically while caring for your souls. Each episode is designed to dive into topics that impact your mission, your calling, and your own personal growth. This is going to be an eclectic episode.
Why would you say that?
Because you and I are both readers, and we both read a lot.
Yeah, I love Clifford,
And
the big red dog.
okay, one of your life-shaping books.
Yeah, no.
Well, we are going to share, is it 18? What was the number we decided on?
17.
17 books that have shaped our life, or books that have been meaningful and impactful. And this 17 was actually kind of cutting things out.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, in the 17, Phil and I are each going to share 7 books. But there's 3 books that we both pretty quickly threw down. I think we should give those first.
You want to do that? Well, first of all, let's frame this. Why is it like, why do books matter? Like for you?
Because
Why listen to a book episode?
the library says reading is cool. No, I'm kidding. Here's the thing. What we read has a huge impact on how we think, how we process. I know for me, in the process of starting our church, I could see how books I read impacted the way I preached, the way I led. I think a lot of people don't like reading because they don't read the right books. You know what I mean? Like there's seasons of my life where some of the books even that we're going to mention probably wouldn't have been helpful. But in God's sovereignty and his kindness, or me seeking out a book, in the right moment and the right time, the book actually taught me things I needed in that moment.
Yeah. And I would even say sometimes I'm reading a book on a specific subject, but then it'll give me it'll cue an idea or stir some curiosity about the actual issue I'm facing or a solution. And so just content consumption that is more developed than like blog posts, but like just deeper diving into books has really helped frame me and shape me into the pastor, person, father, all the things, husband that I need to be.
One of the books that I cut from my list when we were trying to get the numbers down, Stephen King has a memoir on writing, and in it he says good writers have to be great readers. And if you're a good reader, you'll be a horrible writer.
Gotcha.
And I think, if you're in ministry, even if you're not in that pastoral where you're teaching and writing sermons constantly, you're probably in some way creating something. So I do think that, as King would say, that reading fills our mind. It's like a toolbox, and all those things go in the toolbox. And then when you're writing or you're teaching or you're talking, even if you're discipling someone, you just have more to pull from if you're a good reader.
Yeah. The old adage, leaders are readers, right?
Yeah, that's corny, but yeah.
But it's true.
We told the guys in our church, planting residency at our church, that they should read 1 book a year minimum per sermon they preach a year.
Okay.
So if you preach 40 weeks a year, we think you should read 40 books. Just to have content in your mind to be filling your soul. Most of my guys hate that though. So
it's like, I'll just preach once.
Yeah. I will preach 1 time a year.
Dude, does Clifford, the big red dog, count?
That's only if you're David Elliott, the kids pastor.
Okay, there you go.
We'll call out.
And just to throw this out there, Richard and I both read probably close to 100 books a year.
Yeah.
That's or more.
Yeah.
That's a combination of Kindle, audio, physical books. So Clifford, yeah, we're there. So, all right, we have 17 books that have impacted and shaped our lives, and there are 3 that we had the same. Why don't you start?
Yeah, so the first one that we both had on our list, and we're like, we can't just say the same thing twice, was Desiring God by John Piper. I know for me, it was actually the first book I read in that theological camp, that gospel centrality world. A mentor gave me the book and said, hey, I want you to read this. I was 18 years old and I read it. And I literally gave it back to him and said, I hate this book. It's stupid. And he just pushed it back in my hands and said, read it like you love Jesus. And I don't know what happened in that second read through, but the way Piper describes our relationship to God through the lens of enjoyment. I mean, for me, it radically changed the way I view myself. It changed the way I view God, but it really changed the way I view the purpose of our life. In a way that for me was super formative as an 18-year-old guy pursuing ministry.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because that's a very similar thing happened to me. I was probably a sophomore in college at Liberty, and a senior there, his name was Reese. He gave me a copy, or told me to get a copy of Desiring God. He said, hey, let's do this. You're going into ministry. You got ministry potential. read this and let's grab some coffee and talk about it. And that's literally what I did. And I do remember it being, I don't think it was the first book from that camp that I had read, but like it definitely helped me think more deeply about God in ways that I never had thought of before. So it really gave me I really do think that was probably formulative in leading me toward pastoral ministry and just how I see God and view God and worship God. So
what year was it that you would have been a sophomore in college?
2001 or 2.
So for me, I would have been 2015 when I was handed that book. And I say that to say that this Desiring God is a book that has held up well.
Yeah.
Like 14 years later, it's still. God
I could still give it to somebody.
Yeah,
I think it's part of our pastoral residence reading plan too.
Yeah,
just because it's so even if you don't necessarily, even if you're getting that theology from other places, it's like the linchpin book that has pivoted in many ways a generation.
I agree.
So Desiring God, 17 books. There was 16 more to go.
Okay.
The next one that both of us put down is Lord of the Rings, which technically is 4 books we could count.
Yeah.
But it's
even
series.
more if you count
all the extended stuff.
Yeah, but if we're talking about The Hobbit and then the Fellowship, Tower, and Return of the King, for me, man, Lord of the Rings, I learned so much gospel before ever coming to Christ because of the themes of Lord of the Rings. It's just gospel. There's just so many gospel messages. Tolkien was a believer. And he was kind of popular in the apologetic field. Yeah. And there's a saturation of this battle of good versus evil.
Friendship and loyalty, commitment.
And I remember coming to Christ when I was 15, and I remember watching all the extended director's editions again. The books are better than the movies, but I was watching the movies, and I was like, whoa, I never realized. Like, there was so many gospel seeds planted from the ideas in those movies. Yeah. So I love the books.
And it became such a formulative thing for all the fantasies that flowed out of that, from Harry Potter later on to other
you just got us canceled.
No, I didn't. It's a funny story that I probably shouldn't tell on a podcast, but it illustrates how much I've grown in marriage. I love Lord of the Rings, love the movies, watch the movies, and when Pam and I got married, we went on our honeymoon to Williamsburg. Okay. Terrible choice. It was cold. She wanted to go south. I wasn't listening. I was trying to save money. And so anyways, we went to this little tiny timeshare in Williamsburg that somebody had. And so we it ice stormed the entire week we were there. Wow. So we were bored out of our mind.
Of course it did.
At some point on like the first or second day of our honeymoon, I found out that she had never seen Lord of the Rings. And so I was like, you've got to go see it. So we went to Walmart, bought a DVD player, bought all the movies, and then, dead serious. And so I made her watch. She says it's the extended cut. I think it was just the regular ones. It might have felt like the extended cut to her. She hated it, but was like so like kind and graceful to me that she was just like, yeah, this is so great. I'm loving everything about this.
Does she like them now?
Oh, not even a little bit. And she would tell me now, 20 years later into our marriage.
That's awesome.
So anyways, little personal trivia there.
Yeah.
Listen to your wife better than I did at 21.
And be a good hobbit.
And be a good hobbit. The third common book, which is similar vein, is Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis. Probably some of the first books I remember reading like that were substantive chapter-ish books as a kid.
Wow.
And it's amazing. I've probably read through them 5 times in my life. I don't think that's an exaggeration.
Wow.
And when you first read it as a kid, it's like, this is a cool story. But then as a pastor and an adult, you see things that are like, wow, this shows me Jesus in such ways I didn't catch the first time, or theology I didn't catch the first time.
Yeah.
Of course, we'll skip some of the last book's theology, but
no,
we're not going to go down that lane.
I love Chronicles of Narnia. I was thinking about this when you're talking. I think I've quoted it 2 or 3 times, something from the stories in the last year of preaching. But I just want to read this one quote. Aslan is a lion, the great lion. Oh, said Susan, I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. That line for me was influential in my preaching. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't follow a Jesus that by our definition of comfort and our desires is safe, but he's so good. I love that Christ figure of Aslan, like, obsessively. So I love Chronicles of Narnia.
So good. So those 3 books, and
3 of 17,
and this might be a 1 and 2 part, but we'll see where we go. We'll speed up. So I'll go with my individual one, and we'll start splitting up, kind of trading off. But for me, on the John Piper Piper theme. After reading Desiring God, probably 2 years later, I picked up The Pleasures of God, which is in some ways a deepening and a follow up to that. But I remember, and I don't remember what chapter I was reading, but there was a chapter in the middle that hit me so heavy, I had to put it down and like take a month off from it because it was just so so rich, so meaningful. I remember my worship, like just going to worship during that season of reading this book about the doctrine of God that is so deep. It was the deepest thing I've ever kind of pondered. Wow. And then my worship was there, and so it really was just a really pivotal book in college, kind of that followed up with Desiring God. I wasn't a John Piper junkie forever, but I was definitely like diving into his content. It was really pivotal. So that's my first individual one.
My first is another fantasy book. I promise I do read Christian books, but it's The Last Dragon by Silvano Di Mare. Mm-hmm. It's really was aimed probably at like 10, 11, 12-year-olds, but it's just a story about this elf who's the last elf of his kind, and his job is to find the last dragon. And there's a prophecy that if the elf finds the dragon, this apocalyptic medieval wasteland will be restored. And the book really highlighted ideas like friendship, unity. There's a whole chapter about where literally it's them eating dinner together, and it's like about fellowship. And I just remember this idea: the dragon, an elf, and two humans were eating dinner together, and the text was like they should be killing each other, but they're not, because love is greater than war. And I just like that idea. I don't want to say it was gospel themed, but that was like my favorite book as a kid, and I still read it like once a year.
I don't think I've ever read it.
Yeah, I have like 10 copies at my church.
There we go. So when we're going to come to your church next time. Yeah, you're going to give me a copy
to the castle. Yeah,
there we go. The next book I'll put down is a book called The Mission of God by Christopher Wright. And I read this as part of my doctoral studies, not to nerd out for a second, but it was a longer book. It was one of the first books that I had read that it was a biblical narrative focused book that looks at the mission of God from creation to recreation. Wow. And so like it was our new creation. And so there was this sense of just seeing, it was worship themes. Wow. It was mission themed. And it was just, I just really loved to connect the dots in a deeper way from, and I think anytime you can see the narrative themes of Scripture from beginning to end, and the movement of Scripture as a story is a helpful thing. And so that was a book I quoted a lot. I still think about a lot. Yeah. And just the mission of God. And so powerful book.
Yeah. For me, the next one, Spurgeon's Sorrows by Zach Eastwine. It just talks about Spurgeon's battle with depression. And it's really not the edition I have on the back, he says something to the tune of, this book isn't going to give you tips to help with your depression. It'll just let you know you're not the only lonely traveler wandering through the darkness, or something like that. It was actually the first book when we launched Canvas in 2021. It was the first book we did a small group through. We just had so many people who were battling with mental illness, and there was this, there's this feeling in the non-believing world, the non-Christian world, that Christians are either, we're either anti-mental health or care, or we're just completely ignorant of it. And I had a lot of new believers who struggled with mental health issues, a lot of which had been hurt by the church and stances on mental health. And we read it as a group. And it was just, for me, what was so formative is it didn't just say, hey, Spurgeon had depression. It wasn't a biography. It was biographical, but also at the same time, very practical. It was super, it's a great book. Super good. Yeah. You read it too. Mm-hmm. Good. It was a good book.
Yeah, I think we're going to do a podcast on that book at some point, or just what we've learned from it. And
100% good.
So that's on our list.
Should we do podcast? Should we occasionally do a book review episode?
Probably.
Comment if you think that's a good idea.
Yeah, why not? Things we're reading that stir our thoughts.
That'd be fun.
So I'm going to pivot from mental health and Spurgeon's Sorrows to actually more of a practical book. The 4 Disciplines of Execution by a whole bunch of people, Chris, Jim, Sean Covey, like a bunch of different people wrote this one, but 4 Disciplines of Execution. And there was actually, I actually didn't read the whole book. This is one of those books where you got the important, it's one of those books that like you get the key concepts in the first couple of chapters and they just kind of like,
it was so impactful. I didn't read it.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I think it's John Maxwell that says, if you can get 80% of the book's like benefit from 20% of the book, don't feel bad about it. Yeah. And this is one of those books where it kind of kept on layering it. So sure. I read like, I think the first 75%, I was like, okay, I'm good. But the key takeaway for me, leadership wise, I think it was the first book that I was ever exposed to the idea of lead versus lag measures. Mm-hmm. Like when you say like, we want to baptize 10 people this year as a church. That's a lag measure, something that you'll know when you hit it at the opposite side.
Right.
But a lead measure is something that is more like, here are the activities that you can do that would lead to, we want to have 500 gospel conversations. We want to be inviting, praying for people. So it made me really in the early years of our church plant, think through what are some of the goals that we should be setting for ourselves. Rather than just like, we want to grow by 400 people. Like, no, what are the activities you need to do that would lead toward that? Even health wise, right? Like, I want to lose 20 pounds. All right, then every day, here are the disciplines I need to do. So it
100%.
really, for a guy who's like kind of big picture sometimes,
it
really helped me get into the weeds of action steps. So super practical.
A book for me that I read about a year and a half ago. Everyone knows Ruthless Elimination in a Hurry, John Mark Comer. Mm-hmm. I honestly probably could have put that on this list. I'm a fast-paced guy. I started Sabbathing because of that book, but a book he mentioned in it is 3 Mile an Hour God by Koyama. And the whole basis of that book, he was a Japanese theologian. I don't know how popular he is in our circles, but the whole idea is that love has a speed. Mm-hmm. Jesus, fully man, fully God, walked.
Yeah.
And in walking, he did life with these disciples. And for me in ministry, application was, I need to slow down and just be with people, which Phil, from knowing me, that's not easy for me.
No.
I'm not naturally pastoral in the hug, handshake, love you way. I'm way more vision and go and do and preach and evangelize.
Both of us are like that. We're go people.
But this book, man, he just talked about literally the opening line, love has a speed and it's set by God, not by man. And that for me was like just transformative. Yeah. Slow down, be with people, love them. One of the things he says is don't move faster than your Savior did when you're walking with someone. And that was just like, holy crap, I'm a bad pastor and Christian and everything. So
well, I mean,
that's a book. Shut up.
Aren't we all a little bit, I guess?
Definitely.
So the kind of taught you pacing in ministry. Old school book, a little bit, Real Life Discipleship by Jim Putnam or Putman.
I've never even heard of it.
You really? It was actually I read it probably about 3 years before we planted. So, couple years into my first time in full-time ministry. And it was the first time I actually really thought about, discipleship beyond classes.
Wow.
I also read it with a book by Neil Cole. So I will not mention the title that way. It doesn't add to our list.
Yeah, I kind of just added a secret 18th one with
exactly.
Comer.
Yeah, you did. All right. So it was I think it was called The Fruit That Remains by Neil Cole. But really looked at discipleship and walking with somebody, and he broke down stages of a person's growth from like a newborn baby who there's actually not a lot of difference visually between for a newborn Christian, right? Between somebody who doesn't know Christ and somebody who does. In those first few moments, there's an eternity of difference,
right?
But they're going to speak the same. They're going to, in many ways, think the same, but their faith is different. And so helping them move from being a newborn to a child, to a young adult, to a parent, that whole circle of, development, really helped me think through and actually identifies steps toward discipleship. So that's a great book that I think all of our disciple makers should read.
I'm going to read it.
You should.
My next book, and I know there's there's a movie out, which was well done, in my opinion, but there's a lot of weird things out with Bonhoeffer right now. But when I was 17 or 18, I read The Cost of Discipleship. Mm-hmm. The idea that true discipleship requires great personal sacrifice, for me, was that was probably the most formative truth in my preaching.
Yeah.
Hey, to follow Jesus will cost you everything. And everything for some people will look different than others. Bonhoeffer died for what he believed. Mm-hmm. But for, the average Christian, scripture is clear. You have to die to yourself.
Yeah.
And I like the idea, there's cheap grace and then there's costly grace. Just some of those themes and some of those ideas, although I differ greatly with Bonhoeffer on theological matters, I really, really appreciated that.
Such a unique testimony and pastoral season for him.
And he lived out, regardless of our differences, he lived out that idea of discipleship requires great sacrifice. And yeah, for me, it's an inspirational story, having connections, having Jewish family members who were in the Holocaust, who lived in that era, knowing their stories, and then hearing about Bonhoeffer, and then reading that book it changed the way I preach and pastor. Yeah.
That's a book that I've seen and I've quoted, but I've never fully read cover to cover. So I need to dive into that one.
You should. It's good.
This is a biography, my favorite biography that I've read, and it might be my favorite because it was one of the more recent ones that I read. A couple years ago, I read The Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown. I guess that's going to be a movie pretty soon. So maybe we're hitting this before the movie comes out. The movie will probably not be anywhere near the book, but, man, it's a about an Olympic rowing team from the early previous century.
Yeah.
And so many, I don't want to go into all the details, but such a story of grit and teamwork and resilience and hardship that leads toward, I mean, just it checked all the boxes. I mean, I remember weeping during this book. I remember, it was one of those books that I read just like I binged through because it was so good. So, I mean, I love people's stories can just, can super help. I was thinking a quote by Al Mohler that talked about he only reads biographies, which I disagree with. I love fantasy books. But he says that we need to sometimes live in the reality because there's stories in the reality that can inspire us. And I think there's something to that, right? This is a real team that did some real things.
In my bag right now. Sorry, Al. There's 2 fantasy books.
Yeah.
To be fair.
I'm always reading it. I'm always reading a nonfiction book and a fantasy book because I love stories and I love it. So I disagree with him, but I also agree with what he said. There's beauty in the stories around us. So.
Sure. For me, Practice the Presence of God, Brother Lawrence, it's really not really, they sell it as a book, but it's really just a collection of essays, things he wrote, letters. He was a monk who was worked in a kitchen and as a shoemaker, but people were attracted to this guy because of his overwhelming peace in the Lord. Yeah. My favorite thing from that book is he talks about the menial tasks in the kitchen and how he would just train his mind through repetition. I'm doing this unto the Lord. To
worship in those moments.
Yeah. So he, by the end of his life, this guy was a war veteran, fought in the 30 Years War. I don't know if a lot of people don't know that, but he was actually a veteran. Most think he actually had PTSD, which is why he joined the monastery. And when he got there, he was not satisfied with religious programming. He's like, prayer time's great when my superiors make me pray. But what if I could actually just be with Jesus all the time? What a novel idea. And he just prayed and he made a life out of just spending time with the Lord in not the altar night, like you're going to have one tonight. We have an episode on that, which is great. And he valued those things, those prayer times, but really, how do I just make every moment about being with Jesus? His favorite verse was pray without ceasing. Yeah. Which makes sense.
I use that quote that talks about finding God and meeting with God in the busyness and the distractions of the kitchen. I use that with a lot of our young families sometimes because I'm like, listen, I realize that you've got a 3-year-old tugging on your leg at every moment of the day, but as much as we almost can idolize the distracted free worship.
Yeah.
Verse, which I'll only worship if I have this perfect alignment of my life and situations, but he taught us really how to worship in the distraction.
Yeah. I think Jesus on the cross had a posture of submission and worship. There were a lot of distractions.
You would think, yes.
Yeah. I mean that seriously. I think that's where that book challenged me is I lean into this Sabbath, rest, kind of almost at times mystical, don't get scared Baptist friends, world where it's I just need to sit in a room with perfect lighting and perfect ambiance and pray. And Brother Lawrence challenged me, no, I need to when I'm at the gas pump, I need to be thanking God for gas and worshiping that he takes me places gas. You get what I'm saying? Not to over spiritualize, but to live in that worshipful state is hard. Good. Yeah. I love Lawrence.
Yep. My next one is Mere Christianity, which we could both put on our list. Why are you laughing?
I just love C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, anything by C.S. Lewis.
I'll let you have it.
Yes, you can share. You can add some thoughts to it.
It's you.
I read this book when I was in high school.
50 years ago.
Yeah. Well, since I'm 42, the math doesn't math. But it was one of the first theological books that I read. Because I had read Chronicles of Narnia, which led toward, I wonder if this guy's interested. I heard, here's a book that I should read.
Yeah.
I remember where I read it at my parents' house. I remember how I read it and what was going on. And it really did. You know how some of those books are just they are taking blinders off of your world and helping you to see things differently. Because I'd never really thought about some of these arguments, some of these positions, and just so it really helped me think through just why I believed in Jesus, why I could believe in God. So super helpful in anchoring my faith in that season.
Yeah. Well,
how about you? You read it, so tell me. You might as well add your comments.
For me, I struggled when I first came to faith with a consistent theological worldview. I struggled to apply Christianity to the world. Yeah. Because for me, a lot of people who get saved who don't come from a Christian background, when they first come to Christ, and this is what I did, I applied my world to my Christianity more than I applied Christianity to the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that book just helped me kind of rightly order my life. It took some blinders off and let me see more properly. So that's good. I love the book. There's a lot more I would say, but it's not my book.
That's all right. Well, it's technically C.S. Lewis's book.
Yeah. I would like some of the royalties on that. Hey, my next one is Leaders Eat Last.
I've never read this one.
Yeah, it's a follow-up to a book I never read of his. It's one of those books that I honestly think, I hope you never hear this, sir. I don't think you actually need to read the whole book. Kind of like you said, the principle is just living a life of service as a leader. Right now, like at my church, I have a staff team of seven people. And his argument, which I've been trying to live, is, my job is not to order them. My job is to serve them so well, and serve them towards the mission of the organization.
I love that.
But super impactful. But it's based around this idea. If you're having a lunch and there's a buffet, the leader should be the last one in line, because he should say, "Hey, do you have a plate? Oh, someone didn't go up. Hey, can I get you a plate?" Like, it's this really simple idea. It's not a Christian book. I don't even think he's a believer, but there's such a gospel idea to that, like this servitude, this servant leadership thing we always talk about. So love that book.
I think it's great.
Yeah, I'm making my leaders read it. So if they listen to this episode, they have to read it now.
I'm going to read it.
It's our next staff book.
My last one, at least for this list, is least.
This is my least favorite book.
No, it's not my least favorite book. Questioning Evangelism by Randy Newman, who just passed away, I think.
I think so.
Most of us have thought about evangelism and outreach as presentation, or, here's my 4 spiritual laws, here's my 3 circles, whatever tool you're using at the time. And I'm not opposed to any of those. We train our people in those, but especially in a post-Christian world, or I would say a post-Christian valued world where the value of the gospel is super underseen, the ability to ask questions is probably the secret weapon of sharing Jesus.
Amen.
Learning stories. In fact, he just walks through masterfully how to just, and I think this is, I've seen this theme in so many books. Like the most, another book called Listening Well talks about be interested, not interesting. Like, people don't care really who you are, but they love to talk about themselves, and they're attracted to somebody who's interested in their lives. And if we believe souls have value, we should ask questions. So learning people's stories, asking questions. And so I think that's so important, because one of the fears of evangelism, not to go too deep down this path, is I don't have all the answers. Yeah. Well, if you lean into question asking. So anyways, it was really pivotal in how I view evangelism, how I view sharing my faith, and honestly, how I try to love and serve people. Yeah. Ask questions.
I love it. My favorite non-Bible redemption story, Les Mis, Victor Hugo. The themes of redemption, the themes of sacrifice, if you've seen the movie or seen the play, that's awesome. Go read the novel. Just, I think I love the Hugh Jackman musical movie they did. It's great. I watch it like every year around Christmas. But the novel, it goes deeper. It's more revealing. A lot of times books have more than the movie. The play's great. The musical's great. Whatever. Do all that.
I used to listen to the play all the time.
Yeah, it's great. But man, I love the novel. So many gospel themes. But really, what that book did for me, it gave me a heart for the marginalized in my city. Because, the book focuses on the bottom class in French society in a way that I think is really, really aggressively raw. Yeah. Especially when the novel came out, some of the things it depicts, not to give away the book, but there's a mom who passes away, and her life and just some of the things it depicts are just so raw and I think necessary. And then reading that through the lens of what's the redemption in this story for me was like, I want to love the people in my city who are on the outskirts. So
that's good.
Yeah, it's a good book.
So a leader is, if you're
Jim Collins' favorite too.
Okay, there you go.
He's a friend of ours, but
he's going to be on this podcast.
That's an idea. He'll be in town.
There we go. All right, we're not talking about that.
We have some planning to do.
We'll talk about that after I hit stop. But since we don't edit this podcast, let's loop back.
Yeah, this is a raw podcast.
Leaders, if you're listening to this, 17 plus books that have influenced our lives, and this is honestly we decided these lists just before we hit record. So these are just what came to the surface. I hope that you're reading. If you need some suggestions, ask us on social media. Yeah. But just pick up a book.
Or give us some suggestions.
Yeah. Give us some suggestions of books that have shaped your life that we can learn from, because we're always trying to learn. And I really do, by the way, believe that there's a sovereign work of God in these moments.
Come on now.
It's amazing that every time I pick up a book, and it usually feels random. Yeah. It rarely is. Yeah. And so God uses it to teach me something and work something in my life. So I hope that you're reading and learning.
Amen.
Any closing thoughts?
Read more.
Read more. Well, hey, thanks for tuning into this episode of Ministry Mix. If you found today's content valuable and this discussion helpful for your life, make sure you subscribe to this episode or subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any episodes. Also, take a minute to like and review or whatever you need to do to get this toward more leaders. If you got questions, reach out to us on social media. Let us know how we can connect with you and serve you better. But until next time, keep leading with purpose and caring for your soul.